There is a valley in the eastern mountains where the wind never quite stops. It moves through the ridgelines like something living, like something restless, dragging dust and cold air down from the peaks and scattering it across the stone-gray floors below. Soldiers who have trained in that valley describe it the same way always. They say it sounds like breathing, heavy, patient, ancient breathing. The kind that makes a man feel small in a way no enemy ever could. That valley had a name on military maps, a grid reference. A series of coordinates that meant nothing to anyone who had never bled there. But to the men of Ghost Unit 7, the most decorated and feared close-quarters sniper team in the entire Naval Special Warfare Command, that valley had only one name: the Graveyard. They had earned the right to call it that. 4 consecutive rotations, 11 confirmed elimination operations, 0 casualties. Their unit patch, a black rifle scope over a cracked skull, had become something close to mythology in the special operations community, whispered about in briefing rooms. Printed on unauthorized merchandise that circulated through fobs across 3 continents, Ghost Unit 7 did not simply complete missions, they absorbed them. They walked into situations that intelligence analysts had flagged as high-probability catastrophic, and they walked back out again, silent, intact, and covered in the kind of quiet that only comes from men who have seen the absolute worst and decided it was not enough to stop them. Their lead operator was a man named Captain Harlan Cruz. Tall, brick-shouldered, with eyes the color of old concrete, and a jawline that looked like it had been cut from the same stone as the mountains he worked in. He had been doing this for 11 years. He had forgotten more about long-range precision elimination than most operators would ever learn. He was not arrogant about it. Arrogance was for men who had something to prove. Harlan Cruz had nothing left to prove. He simply knew what he was, the way a hammer knows what it is. His unit trusted him completely and without question. 6 men. Each one selected not just for skill but for a particular kind of psychological stillness. The ability to wait, to hold, to watch something terrible approaching and not flinch. They were not heroes in the way that word gets used in press releases and recruitment videos. They were instruments. Precision, controlled, extraordinarily dangerous instruments. The morning the orders came through for Operation Dusk Rail, Cruz was sitting outside the command tent at their forward operating base, drinking coffee that had gone cold an hour ago without him noticing. The sky above was the deep purple-gray of early dawn, the kind that makes everything look underwater. His second, a thick-necked Georgian man named Sergeant First Class Damon Reeves, ducked out of the tent and dropped a manila folder into his lap without a word. Cruz looked at the cover sheet. Read it once, then read it again, slower. The mission parameters were straightforward enough on the surface. A hostile sniper cell had been operating in the valley for 6 weeks, picking off coalition support personnel with a precision that had intelligence officers at Central Command deeply unsettled. Not because of the body count, though that was significant, but because of the pattern. Every shot had been taken from an impossible position, angles that should have been blocked by terrain, distances that pushed the absolute limit of credible human capability, and always there was no shell casing, no trace, no thermal signature from any aerial asset, nothing. 6 weeks of nothing. The file contained a secondary note, clipped to the back with a red staple, which Cruz had learned over the years meant someone in the intelligence chain was uncomfortable. The note said, in the clipped, bloodless language of official military communication, that the hostile unit appeared to consist of a single operator. Cruz read that line 3 times. He was not a man given to dismissal, but a single operator holding down a 6-week campaign against coalition forces in terrain that complex, at those ranges, with 0 detection. Even he felt the edges of his skepticism rising. He told himself it was bad intelligence, a miscount, some failure of surveillance continuity that made multiple operators look like one. He folded the folder, finished his cold coffee, stood up. "Wheels up in 2 hours," he said to no one in particular. The valley looked exactly the way it always did, indifferent, massive. Carved by something geological and ancient that had no interest in what small, warm-blooded creatures chose to do within it. The team inserted via HAHO jump at 300, gliding silently through the dark in a wide formation. Landing so far from the target grid that even the most sophisticated listening equipment would have caught nothing. They moved through the first 3 kilometers in complete silence, hand signals only, spacing tight enough to maintain visual contact in the dark, but loose enough not to cluster. Cruz had run this terrain before. He knew the rock formations by shape and shadow. He knew where the wind came from and how it bent sound. He knew every natural hide site within 2 clicks of their objective. He thought he knew this place. At the 3-kilometer mark, Reeves touched his shoulder. One tap, stop, they froze. The silence that followed was not natural. It was the kind of silence that comes when everything in the immediate environment has already decided to stop making noise. The birds, the small animals, the wind itself going briefly, eerily still. Cruz had felt that silence before, only in moments when something in the landscape was already watching. He signaled a full perimeter hold and they dropped into the rock, weapons up, scanning in overlapping arcs. Nothing moved. For 4 minutes, nothing moved. Then, far above them, on a ridgeline that Cruz had already assessed and dismissed as tactically irrelevant, because the angle from up there to their likely operational area was wrong. Something caught the edge of his peripheral vision. A flicker, not movement exactly, more like the absence of something that should have been there, a shape against the sky that was not quite right. He raised his scope. There was nothing there. He lowered it. They moved on. The second encounter happened 6 hours later, deep in the operational zone when his point man Marcus went down. Not killed, not even wounded in the traditional sense. Marcus simply ceased to be standing and was suddenly on the ground, his rifle 3 feet away from him, and there was no sound, no shot, no displacement of air. Nothing that Cruz could register as having happened in the sequence of events he was tracking. Marcus was breathing, pulse was strong, he was unconscious. Cruz had seen this exactly once before, in a training exercise in the Pacific Northwest, when an instructor had demonstrated what he called the pressure technique. A method of incapacitation that used precise, catastrophic force, applied to a single nerve cluster in the back of the neck that dropped a man like a switch had been thrown. It required getting within arm's reach. In the middle of an open approach corridor, in a valley they had swept for presence, with 6 trained operators conducting active visual coverage. Something had gotten within arm's reach of his point man, and he had felt nothing. Cruz stood very still. He looked at the ridgeline, the correct one this time, the one with the natural overwatch position, the one any serious operator would have chosen, empty. He looked at the one he had dismissed 6 hours ago. He looked for a long time. "Pull back to secondary," he said quietly. His voice was flat, professional. But something underneath it had shifted, the way ice shifts just before it cracks, almost nothing, almost soundless but definitive. They pulled back. Marcus came around 20 minutes later with no memory of what had happened, and a slight pressure bruise on the back of his neck that the medic photographed and said nothing about. The third encounter happened the next morning, and it was different. Cruz had repositioned the team to a hardened natural position, 360 cover, rock on 3 sides, sight lines on the 4th. He had set 2 of his best men on rear watch. He had personally swept the surrounding 200 meters before they settled in. He had done everything right. He was running through the updated grid data when he heard it. A footstep, single, deliberate, Behind him and to the left, inside the perimeter, inside the position they had sealed. He turned. She was sitting on a rock, not crouched, not in a defensive posture. Sitting with the particular unhurried stillness of someone who had been there for a while, and had decided there was no particular reason to pretend otherwise. She was slight in frame, but not small in the way that reads as fragile. She read as compressed, like something that takes up less space than its actual force would suggest. Her gear was stripped down to almost nothing. No bulky vest, no standard load, just a custom rig that Cruz had never seen the configuration of before. Her rifle was across her knees, bolt action, long, old, and maintained with a devotion that was visible even from where he stood. Her face was unreadable, not cold exactly, more like a landscape. Present but without the performance of expression that most people wear when they're being looked at. His entire team had their weapons up. She had not moved. "You can lower those," she said. Her voice was low and even, and carried no particular accent that he could identify, though there was something in the cadence of it that suggested she had spent time in places where English was not the primary language. "If I wanted any of you down, you'd already be there." The worst part, Cruz thought, was that he believed her. He did not lower his weapon, but he held. "Who are you?" he said. Not a question, exactly. A demand made quiet by the fact that volume felt suddenly irrelevant. She looked at him for a moment. Then she reached into the inside pocket of her jacket and produced something and set it on the rock beside her. A coin. Military challenge coin, brass, worn smooth on one face from years of handling. She set it there and left it and folded her hands back over the rifle. He didn't move. Reeves was closest. He glanced at Cruz. Cruz gave the smallest possible nod. Reeves moved forward, picked up the coin, looked at it, and his face did something Cruz had never seen it do in 11 years of working together. It went absolutely blank. Reeves turned and held it out, and Cruz took it and looked at it. The coin was from the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment, Delta. The embossed symbol on the worn face was unmistakable to anyone in the community, but it was not the unit designation that stopped him. It was the name engraved on the back in small, precise letters. He read the name. He read it again. He had heard that name once, 4 years ago, in a classified debrief that he had been given partial access to. A document that described a 12-day solo operation in a denied access territory that had produced results that the senior analysts had initially refused to believe were possible. Results that had been attributed to a full team, because attributing them to a single operator required a revision of what the community believed a single operator was capable of. The name on the coin was hers. He looked up at her. The valley breathed around them. That old, patient, enormous breathing. Rowan, he said, not her rank, not a title. Just the name, placed carefully into the air between them like something he needed to confirm was real. She looked at him without surprise, without satisfaction, without the particular performance that people do when they've been recognized and want to receive it. "The unit you've been chasing for 6 weeks," she said, "is not a unit. And the intelligence your command has been building the targeting package on is wrong. There are 3 cells, not 1, and 2 of them know your team is here. The 3rd one knows where your command element is." The stillness that moved through Cruz was total, professional. He processed it the way he had trained himself to process catastrophic information. Not by suppressing it, but by letting it pass through and settle into the operational layer where it became simply data, actionable, cold, and necessary. "How long have you known we were inserted?" he said. "Since before you jumped," she said. She said it without apology, without theatrics. Just the clean, hard fact of it, delivered the way a surgeon delivers a diagnosis. "This is what is happening. Now we decide what to do about it." He looked at her for a long time. She looked back at him with that landscape face of hers, patient and enormous and without the performance of waiting. He lowered his weapon. The rest of the team followed a half-second later. What came next was 6 hours of the most compressed, precise, and brutally effective tactical coordination Cruz had ever been part of. And he understood within the first 40 minutes of it that she was not coordinating with them in the way that operators coordinate with allied units. With shared protocols and mutual adjustment and the constant negotiation of rank and procedure. She was working, and she was allowing them to be useful. She moved through that valley with a quality of belonging that was difficult to articulate. She did not consult the terrain so much as move in agreement with it. She knew where the wind shifted and where it didn't. She knew which rock faces absorbed sound and which ones threw it back. She had been here long enough and paid close enough attention that the valley had become an extension of her operational body in a way that would have taken Cruz's team weeks to develop and might never have fully developed at all. She put the first cell down without a shot fired. Close quarters, 3 operators. And when Cruz's team arrived at the position per her instruction, they found 3 men unconscious and zip-tied with the particular efficiency of someone who had long ago stopped finding violence dramatic and began treating it as a logistical problem. The second cell was harder. They had moved, likely tipped by something, some signal or dead man protocol that Rowan had anticipated but not been able to fully neutralize. She adjusted. She didn't explain the adjustment. She simply gave new coordinates and moved, and Cruz found himself doing something he had not done in 11 years of independent command. He followed. Not because he had been ordered to, not because he had suspended his judgment, but because somewhere in the preceding hours something had become simply, undeniably clear. In any given environment, there is a person who understands it most completely, and in this valley on this day, that person was not him. The second cell was resolved at the northern ridgeline, the one Cruz had dismissed as tactically irrelevant the night before, as the angle from up there to their likely operational area was wrong. He understood now why she had been up there, because she had not been thinking about their likely operational area. She had been thinking about a position that gave her unobstructed eyes on their insertion route, their approach corridor, their hold position, and 3 of the 4 possible extraction vectors simultaneously. He had dismissed the ridgeline because he had been thinking about what he would need. She had been up there because she had been thinking about what everything needed. The third cell, the one she had said knew the location of the command element, was dealt with in a way that Cruz was never fully briefed on. Because it happened during a window in which she had separated from them entirely, given them a holding coordinate, and told them to wait. They waited for 31 minutes. Then she came back, moving out of the dark the way she always moved, as though the dark were simply another piece of terrain she had reached an understanding with, and she said, "It's done." "Your command element is secure," Reeves asked her how. She looked at him without unkindness. "Does it matter?" she said. Reeves had no answer for that. At the extraction point, while they waited for the birds, Cruz sat a few meters away from her in the pre-dawn dark. The valley around them was finally, genuinely quiet. Not the watched quiet of hours ago, a different kind, the quiet of something that has concluded. He looked at the coin in his hand. He had been holding it since Reeves gave it to him and had not fully registered that he was still holding it until now. "Why the coin?" he said. She was looking at the ridgeline, the one he had dismissed. Her expression was the same as it always was, but something in the set of her shoulders was different, slightly lower. The fraction of release that comes from a long job reaching its end. "People need a frame of reference," she said. "A name alone doesn't give them anything to hold on to." He thought about that. "The file we had on you," he said, "was flagged above my clearance level. I only saw part of it. Most people only see part of it." He looked at her profile against the lightening sky. How long have you been running solo operations? She was quiet for a moment, not avoiding the question, calculating what answer was actually useful. Long enough, she said, that I stopped thinking of them as solo. He didn't fully understand that, but he held it. The rotors came up from the south, low and fast, and the wind from the valley rose to meet them the way it always did, that old breathing. That permanent restlessness, moving through the stone ridges and the hard, cold air. And in the gray half-light, as the birds came down and his team began to move, and Cruz stood up from the rock and brushed dust from his jacket, he looked at her once more. She was already looking at the mountains, not at the helicopter, not at him. At the mountains, with the particular quality of attention that some people give to things they love, or things they have made peace with, or things they know they will return to. He put the coin in his chest pocket. He never gave it back. There is a kind of strength that makes noise, that announces itself. That wears its history on the outside, and uses it the way some people use a raised voice, to fill a room, to preempt doubt, to establish the terms before anyone else can. And then there is another kind, the kind that has no interest in the terms. The kind that has been in enough rooms and enough valleys, and enough moments of absolute extremity that the performance of strength has long since dropped away, leaving only what it actually is. Quiet and patient, and so thoroughly at home in difficulty that difficulty has simply become the texture of existence. Ghost Unit 7 returned to the forward operating base at 6:12. Their after-action report described the operation as a joint coordination effort with an Allied asset. The name of the Allied asset was redacted in the final document. But in the margins of Harlan Cruz's personal copy, in his own handwriting in letters small enough that you'd have to know to look for them, was a single word, Rowan, and nothing else. Because nothing else was needed, the valley kept breathing, the mountains kept their silence. And somewhere in the space between what can be proved and what can only be known, the truth of what had happened that day settled into the permanent record of things that are real but rarely spoken. She had been there long before they arrived. She had known them before they knew she existed. She had moved through their perimeter like weather through an open window, not violent, not announcing itself, simply present and then gone and then present again, on her own terms in her own time. Some forces cannot be classified, cannot be contained in a file or a briefing or even a coin. They can only be encountered. And if you are very still and very honest with yourself about what you are actually seeing, you will recognize them, not as a threat, not as an ally, as something older than both of those words. Something the mountains already know, something the wind has always understood. Something unkillable, not because it cannot be hurt, but because it has already decided that being hurt is simply not a reason to stop.